All right, let's talk about what we can expect for 2020. Get into an election year, and that tends to mean that very little gets done in Washington. You think that's going to be the case this time around? Seth, you first.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect too much at all in 2020 in Congress. I mean, I think the flurry of legislative activity a couple weeks ago was basically it for this Congress. And so I would expect more kind of proposals creating contrasts, but not actual legislating in 2020.
Adam, if there is anything that could be done, what would you target?
You know, I think it's the time for the Republicans to set the agenda and say something that's very different than what the Democrats are proposing. We're seeing sort of tax anything that moves proposals that are coming from the left right now, and I think it's time for Republicans to really own the tax cuts that they passed and double down on that agenda. That Americans deserve to keep more of their money rather than sending it to Washington.
Okay, let's talk about what could potentially happen with Taxes 2.0. That's been something that the Republicans have floated, have talked about. What potential changes would you see with any taxes coming through? Adam?
Well, I think it's most important to keep what we got, making the tax cuts that expire in 2020 permanent. But almost unanimously, every Democratic proposal has a piece of it that wants to dramatically raise taxes on savings and investment across the board for middle-class savers, for high-income earners. And so I think Republicans need to put forward something like a universal savings account that allows middle-class savers to put money away for things other than retirement. It would be like your 401k, allow you to save, but for everything in life that we should be saving for other than just retirement. I think this paired with permanent tax cuts, continuing to increase investment here in the United States, are the main planks of what tax reform should look like going forward.
Seth, I have a hard time imagining that any Democrats would support extending those tax cuts permanently, at least not without some big sweeteners along the way. Would something like a middle-class tax cut, middle-class savings plan, or even the SALT deduction, having that reinstated, would any of those things, you think, lure anybody from the left to go along and support Republicans on making those tax cuts permanent?
I mean, I think the problem is that, President Trump, he's now going into his fourth year of office, and he now has a record. And he realizes that the 2017 tax law is a big liability for him because it was sort of the exact opposite of what he promised and the exact opposite of what people actually want in the tax code, which is the number one priority is making corporations and wealthy pay their fair share. So he has a liability, and we've sort of been hearing about this tax cut 2.0 for a couple of years now, and then we've never actually seen it. And I think, if they roll something out in 2020, I think it's going to be seen through the political lens.
Sure, but if they dangled something like reinstating SALT deductions, would that be something that you could see some Democratic congressional representatives go along with?
I mean, it's really hard to see. I mean, they threatened to veto the SALT bill that came out of the House. But I really don't think that there's going to be much room for compromise on taxes in 2020. I mean, I think you're just going to see setting up a contrast with President Trump defined by the record he already has on taxes from 2017, $2 trillion increase in the deficit for tax cuts weighted to the wealthy and corporations, and the Democrats wanting to roll back some of those tax cuts, close loopholes, and increase tax credits for low and moderate income working families.
One thing that strikes me is that the two sides are so far apart in terms of where they think taxes should be, what they think the structure should be, that there's a chance you never get any permanent tax reform that's put in, and you deal with these part-time solutions for whatever administration is in office at that time, for whichever party happens to control Congress at that point. I mean, that to me seems like the worst of all possible worlds, to constantly have tax policy changing and sliding all over the place, both for corporations and for individuals. What do you think of that, Adam?
I agree. I mean, I think having permanent tax policy is one of the most important pieces, and that's why making the tax cuts that we got in 2017 permanent is so important. But I want to go back to this SALT deduction.
But let me just say, if you want it to be permanent, you probably will have to give on something and find some way to compromise with the other side. You're never going to get permanent unless you can find some way to sweeten the deal for both sides.
Well, I mean, I think that allowing Americans to keep more of their money is an important principle that conservatives should stick to. But you're right. I think there are places where the two sides of the aisle need to come together. the Republicans and Democrats around Washington unanimously criticize all sorts of subsidies and loopholes that are in the tax code that could help pay for making a lot of some of these tax cuts permanent. We unfortunately saw Congress at the end of the year extend a lot of these through the temporary extenders, providing special tax credits to various different special industry constituents here in Washington. It's these types of sort of Washington swamp as usual policies that we can compromise on and get rid of from the tax code permanently.
Mm-hmm. Seth, a quick last word on this.
Yeah, no, I agree with Adam about, the permanence is good and these sort of last-minute special interest giveaways are not good. I mean, I think the Republicans, though, had their chance, and the Trump administration had their chance in 2017, and they made a decision, which is make the corporate tax cuts permanent and make the individual tax cuts, the tax cuts for families and households, expire after 2025. And so that's why those tax cuts are temporary.